Welcome to meeting number 14 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. Everyone here is a member of the committee and knows the rules, so I'll spare you that. Today we are in public for committee business. There are a few things that I hope that we will cover, but given that it's committee business, members are absolutely at liberty to bring up whatever topic they wish. Just so that you know, the things that I hope we're going to be able to cover today is the report that we're going to do, or the study that we're going to do upon completion of the present study on urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing. We did identify a study on employment insurance as a priority, so we'll need to plan whether that will be our next study and some of the logistics around getting it set up so that we can be efficient on February the 18th, which is the next day open to begin work on our next study. There was a request from Mr. Viss to send a letter off to the Department of Indigenous Services to get some clarification on one of the written answers they've provided. I'd like the committee to consider that draft correspondence. And other than that, probably a conversation about our next meeting on the Rapid Housing Initiative and the meeting after that in connection with the Parliamentary Budget Officer. So those are the four things that I would like to cover today. However, I am in your hands. This is committee business, and so the floor is open. And if I may suggest that we begin with the subject of our next study to begin on the 18th. Please use, just so that we're not talking over each other, everyone is familiar and comfortable with one another, so that is bound to happen. But if you could please use the raise hand function, that might help us get through this efficiently. I recognize Ms. Falk, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, just fine.
Okay, perfect. I'm just wondering, can you, I don't know if I've missed this somewhere, that's totally a possibility, working from home and having 3 kids that are very, very small. When was the EI study, when was the decision made with the committee that that's a priority, the next study or the priority?
The study was received, it looks like everyone was provided with a log of the motions.
I know.
It looks like it was December 9th was when the motion was presented, and I do believe that in setting the work plan that we did identify that and rapid housing as the 2 priority items after this study, but I don't have, I believe that to be the case, and I guess I'm looking to the clerk or Madame Chabot to indicate that there was in fact a motion passed to that effect.
Okay, well, I guess I mean I don't recall that happening. So if someone could confirm that, that would be great. That being said, I know I supplied the clerk with a motion, and she did distribute it in both official languages. So I'd like to take this moment to move that motion and read it into the record. I believe that this actually, with COVID being a evolving situation, I think that we should be nimble also. And so anyway, that pursuant to the Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the impact of COVID-19 on the financial, social, health, and overall well-being of seniors, that the committee review existing and announced programs for seniors and make recommendations to improve support for seniors, that the study be comprised of no less than 6 two-hour meetings, that the committee invite the Minister of Seniors and departmental officials to appear for 1 hour each. that the committee, pursuant to Standing Order 109, present its findings with recommendations to the House, and that the committee requests that the government provide a comprehensive response. And so some of the justifications, I guess, for studying this at this particular time. We just had a fall economic statement. There was money allocated in there for programs such as New Horizons, seniors, long-term care. I think it would be great to really take an in-depth look at seniors. I mean, they are the ones that have built this country, and take a look at their social, their mental health, their financial health, how they're being affected, especially seniors, differing from rural and urban settings, and also with the lockdowns and social isolation and physical isolation that's having on our seniors. And taking that time, I think. I've heard from seniors from all across Canada as well as groups, and they are a group that are falling through the cracks. And I think it's our job as parliamentarians to make sure that we honor our seniors, those who have paved the path before us, and make sure that we hear how they're being affected with COVID and bring their concerns to the House.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. The motion is in order, so the debate is on the motion. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is the Speaker of the House who told me today that my mic was too high up over my head. Anyway, so I just wanted to let you know that. Anyway, you're not the only one to tell me that from time to time. So first of all, I would like to talk about what we have to do today, and then I'll have a few comments about the motion that was just tabled. I understand that we must choose what we will do next, and we received a document, but there's nothing on that plan because we have to make decisions. We want to make sure that our work will be efficient. Many motions were adopted. You will remember that when we came back after the prorogation of the House, we decided to re-adopt all the motions that had been tabled. Then I tabled 5 motions, if I remember correctly. And Mr. Viss also tabled a motion on the Rapid Housing Initiative. And then in a subcommittee, we decided that the first 3 priorities were the following: housing for Indigenous peoples, and we are almost done with that study. Now, what I understood is that we would study the Rapid Housing Initiative, and we have to work on the calendar. Will we hear witnesses for that study? And the third study was, in fact, the study on EI, and I tabled a motion to that effect, and the motion was adopted. Regarding the last proposal, well, first of all, what I would tell you to study the situation of seniors during the pandemic, well, I believe that to study their well-being, their financial, social well-being, it's important. However, we have to be careful here. Why? A lot of services, especially health services, fall under the provincial jurisdiction. Social programs, same thing. So if we look into that, we'd have to do it from a perspective of federal programs. I'll also mention that I had tabled a motion on the impoverishment of elders. I don't want to compete here, but I think there is some overlap between the motions. If Ms. Falk has read it, she might see that. So it speaks to the impoverishment of elders.
Just a quick comment from me. I noticed Mr. Turnbull's old motion from the suite of materials received from the committee clerk, and I think a discussion on seniors could absolutely include a discussion to include some of the provisions he suggested earlier about how that would relate to the national housing strategy. I think that would actually fit nicely together, because we can't address the issues of seniors right now without addressing housing and long-term care. Madame Chabot, I take your comments as well about respecting the proper orders of government and how that relates to our study as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. Mr. Long, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everybody. Just a comment. I certainly would want to be on record as supporting MP Falk's motion. I think it's very, very relevant, and certainly EI and seniors are top of mind for all Canadians right now. And you know, I know the subcommittee report prioritized MP Chabot's motion, but I'm certainly in favor of MP Falk's motion after we study MP Chabot's. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, along the same lines, I just dug up an old document here that was dated October 21st, 2020, and it was a subcommittee report that clearly indicates that the EI study, I think, would be next in the line after the Rapid Housing Initiative work. And so just wanted to express my support for that and just not go back on what the subcommittee had said. And yet I really want to show support for Ms. Falk's motion. I think it's a great study. I like it worded. I appreciated Mr. Viss's comments about housing and the link to housing, but I do think that the way Ms. Falk's motion is worded, I think it keeps it focused on seniors, but allows us the latitude to explore the many needs, the many ways that seniors have been impacted in COVID-19, which may include housing, but would include a lot of other things, which I think is better in my view to have that wider net cast. And so I would support both, but in that order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull, and thanks for locating that document. I was flipping through trying to find it, and it's consistent. What you said was consistent with my recollection, so that's appreciate that. Ms. Gazan, please.
Yes, I just want to share that I do support certainly the motion coming from MP Falk in saying that I know that we had agreed on an order. I do know that, we know during the pandemic that seniors are really in a dire situation, certainly in my riding, many seniors living in severe poverty, on the verge of homelessness. I don't think we can lose sight on that if we're particularly in the pandemic and looking at, really vulnerable populations, knowing, respecting decisions we made as a group. I'm wondering if there's flexibility to include portions of the next studies which fit really nicely to focus on seniors. I know it's on income or employment insurance, but maybe we could also reserve part of that for a broader exploration of income supports in general. For example, we know OAS, from my opinion, is totally inadequate and is leaving seniors in a very vulnerable position. So I'd just like to put that forward, and also in the Rapid Housing Initiative, where do seniors fit into that? A rapid housing initiative, as we know that there's a number of seniors on the verge of homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gazan. Mr. Kent, please.
Thanks. Well, yes, following on Ms. Gazan's remarks, and I think both of these, both the EI and the senior studies are worthy. And as the conversation continues now, I don't think the committee needs to be bound by a decision made 2 months ago. I think our consideration now should be on the basis of which study is most timely, which recommendations from the study would be most effective in addressing the very serious challenges that we have, both with regards to EI and the fact that it's terribly outdated and has caused some huge disruptions in terms of the transfer from the CERB to the CRB. But I think Ms. Falk and Ms. Chabot's resolutions do underline the fact that seniors have been among the biggest losers in the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Madame Chabot. Vous êtes en sourdine, Madame Chabot.
You're on mute, Ms. Chabot. It's all right. It's all right. I'm here. Everything's fine. I just had a little bit of difficulty. It's incredible. Sorry for that. I apologize to everyone. It's important not to confuse things. The EI study, that was a decision that was made as a third priority, and that was not by chance. The EI program is a federal one. We know that we had to put in place a lot of temporary measures to deal with the pandemic. Those temporary measures will soon come to an end. We also saw at our committee a motion for which we were supposed to look over CERB, but we know that EI has to be reviewed, and that's part of the minister's mandate. And I think that EI and seniors are not in the same category, and I think it's urgent that we study this and maintain our motion on EI. And it's important to talk about the situation for seniors on the whole, in a general sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, I just wanted to repeat, I support the motion that Ms. Falk has put forward. I believe the motion Ms. Falk has put forward is a standalone motion. It doesn't relate to priority. Donc, comme j'ai dit, j'appuie la motion.
As I said, I support Ms. Falk's motion. I think the next study should be on EI, as we agreed on in the fall, and we should uphold that priority. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I believe we're at the end of the speaking order. So we have a motion from Ms. Falk. As Mr. Housefather rightly pointed out, it does not indicate priority. I heard every single speaker speak in favor of it. Can we agree that the motion is adopted by consent, or do we require a vote? I see Adam's hand up. Is that because you want to say something, or because you? Okay, go ahead, Adam.
So looking at a couple of different motions we have on the page together around seniors, there's a clear consensus within the committee to act on seniors, but I too will be supporting the decision we made to study EI that was put forward by Madame Chabot as that was made in good faith, and I think there's important work to be done there, especially as we look at its application to things like basic income and other elements. So I think the EI study is important. I think it's important to look at what changes were made and how we move forward on that. At the same time, I think that MP Falk has brought forward an important concern, and when you take a look at the prior motions that were passed on it and trying to sort of package them together. If we were to change the motion to be a bit more specific and have it follow on the EI study, I think we could get both done in a timely fashion. But the motion that I would propose that sort of pulls together the different motions would be that the committee study the impact federal programs and transfers to other orders of government and individuals related to seniors and older Canadians how they've been impacted and or augmented due to COVID. The study will also examine how other federal programs not directly related to seniors, but how they may be reformed to better serve Canadians as they age. And I think what this does is it ties in the point that I think it was Mr. Viss made around seniors housing. It's not an explicitly defined program within the National Housing Strategy, but we do fund seniors housing, although we don't fund long-term care. We might want to look at why that is and what the provincial objections to that are. But I think this captures all of the seniors issues and gives us a wide field that incorporates the other members' ideas. So as I said, I think that MP Falk's brought a motion forward that I think the consensus of the committee is to support, but it needs to be a little bit broader just to capture some of the additional points that were raised by other MPs in the conversation. And that's the motion that I would put in its place to get the study done if it's met with the committee approval.
All right. So what Mr. Vaughan has put forward is actually quite a substantial change to the motion of Ms. Falk. So I'd like to hear from Ms. Falk whether she is agreeable to her in effect replacing her motion with that one or expanding it such that it looks like that one. Because if it isn't considered to be friendly, it's her motion that's on the floor, and it's her motion that will have to be voted upon before we consider the one that Mr. Vaughan has put forward. Because this would have to, as I say, there's a motion on the floor that needs to be dealt with. So, Ms. Falk, your thoughts on what Mr. Vaughan just had to say?
I thank you, Chair, and thank you, MP Vaughan, for the suggestion. I guess I thought we had made it pretty broad already. Do you have these changes written down, or are you able to send it out? Okay, you'll do that. Yeah, Chair, I'd like to see it in writing first before I commit to changing something completely.
Fair enough. Would you be comfortable for us to table this discussion until we can deal with a few other things and then come back to it?
As long as I have your word that we'll touch it before the end of the meeting.
You got it.
Perfect.
In fact, we'll come back to it as soon as you're ready, because Mr. Vaughan will send it to you, and then you can let us know.
Thank you.
I recognize Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Ça va, Monsieur.
It's all right, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also see the written changes that Mr. Vaughan proposes.
Back to that motion. Given that we will be, I guess I wonder if we can now go to the will of the committee with respect to future business. We know that we are, it seems to me that we have consensus that a motion regarding seniors ought to be passed, whether it's one that looks like what Mr. Vaughan presented or the original version from Ms. Falk. We do have some discussion around the fact that we have identified an EI study as the next item. Are we ready to enter into a discussion as to whether we do in fact go forward with the EI study as the next option, or whether it should be whichever seniors study, the scope of a senior study that is next? I'd like to get us to the point where we know what we're going to be doing on February the 18th.
Just before that kicks off, I've sent a draft to MP Falk. Sorry, to m'apologier en anglais pour Madame.
I'm sorry, it's in English.
apologizing to Madame Chabot.
Madame
I sent it, I've drafted in
est-ce-
English. I wouldn't even pretend to draft it in French, but Sean, you have it as well if you can get it to the clerk.
okay, Madame la greffière, est-ce que
Madame Clerk, would it be possible to have the motion translated right away today, or will you need more time? It depends on the changes that are made. I will have to look at it first. It might take some time. I'm not sure.
OK, OK, je vais l'envoyer tout de suite.
Thank you. I will send it to you right away. Ms. Falk.
In response to your question about priority of study, I believe Ms. Chabot's study would be 5 meetings. Is that correct?
The motion called for a minimum of 5 meetings.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, I would support, I guess, doing her EI study for the next 5 meetings if it meant that we did the senior study soon after, making sure that we have, making sure that we're, making sure that we're, doing what we need to do for seniors, I guess. Just making sure that's on the schedule, I guess, and not having a meeting like this in between the 2 studies.
Okay. That being the case, I think we have consensus on what we're going to be doing on the 18th. Mr. Kent, I believe, was the only one who expressed some reservations. Are we okay, he's all right. Okay, so I take it as a consensus that the next study to be considered is the study on EI proposed by Madame Chabot and identified as a priority by the subcommittee. Thank you, colleagues. Can we move now? I see the analyst has her hand up.
Sorry, I
ahead.
would
Yep.
just like
Yeah.
to ask, so a 5-meeting study on EI is the next priority to start on February 18th, is my understanding. So I would just add that a 5-meeting study on EI is, given the scope and the breadth of EI, is very, very large. So I'm just wondering if the committee had any advice for us in terms of, when we're preparing background materials, if there is a specific focus, like coverage or special benefits, or I'm just throwing out ideas, not to make your lives more complicated, but it would just help us to help make sure that we're prepared for this study.
Which will help make us more effective. So a couple of things, if we can have some comments in response to that inquiry in terms of any themes of interest within the employment insurance system that we would want to examine and that we would like a little bit of background information on. And we should also, colleagues, talk about a deadline for witness lists and briefs and the like. So I recognize Mr. Viss on these points. Go ahead.
Thank you to the analysts for that very important question. I believe that the Department of Employment and Social Development did a report a few years, I think it was in 2017, and we discussed it at committee over a year ago, about the capacity of the employment insurance mainframe to actually handle various technological updates and be able to respond to people accordingly. So I think one aspect of the study, if it's so comprehensive, is the capacity of Employment and Social Development Canada to actually run the EI program, or is this going to have to be done moving forward through the Canada Revenue Agency? So the role of government in administering the program would be one area I would like to focus on. The second area I would like to focus on is how the employment insurance system responds to the needs of seniors. Actually, I mentioned to the minister at committee that for my mother-in-law, whose English is like her 4th language, and who worked her entire life, paid into the system, trying to actually navigate the system was very challenging. And what can we look at to ensure that employment insurance application processes meet the needs of Canadians who have English as their or French not as their first language. And I think that's a timely thing to look at, in addition to what we need to review in respect to qualifying periods, regional discrepancies that are embedded into the system as well. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Viss. I'm particularly interested in that last one, the EI zones, for what it's worth. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to indicate that we have tried to come up with a very concrete motion. It is true, EI is a broad topic. We have a limited number of meetings. We want to hear people who know the topic, who are on the ground, from employees, employers, unemployment movement, and so on, to find out more about the gaps in our system and correct them. We mentioned the minister in the motion. We want to invite her so she can come and tell us about these issues. We know they're working on that. It's part of her mandate. So I think we need to look at all this in a broader manner. We need to look at eligibility, for instance, and the goal being to have a program that is able to meet Canadians' needs or people's needs. This is what we want to look at. We do not want to dedicate a greater number of meetings to that. And I'm sorry, it might be an issue with interpretation, but EI has nothing to do with seniors. It only has to do with workers. So I'm not saying that there are no seniors at work, but you know what we want to talk about? We want to talk about a system that before the pandemic only helped about 40% of Canadian workers. So we had to come up with CERB and so on to cover the system's failures. So we can all agree on how important it is to modernize this system. So eligibility is one of the important issues we do need to look into.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, understanding that employment insurance is one guaranteed income program amongst many guaranteed income programs that is provided, I would argue that, as a result of the pandemic, we've seen gaps in guaranteed income programs, whether it is rates of EI, who qualifies for EI, who doesn't qualify for EI, the consequences of that. I would recommend part of the study be focused on a guaranteed livable basic income. I know that there's been some research that has already been put out by Senate of the cost savings that would have been available had they just put in place, for example, a guaranteed livable basic income rather than the high administrative costs that were part of the CERB rollout. So, although people say seniors are different, I would argue that because seniors as well also receive a guaranteed livable income, I think we need to have a more holistic study of what that looks like going forward, rather than just studying a system that clearly is not working and not looking at alternatives.
Thank you, Ms. Gazan. Mr. Long, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just an idea I wanted to comment on with respect to MP Chabot's study. We could theme the meetings, like, one day would be regular benefits, the next day we could study sickness, the next day maternity leave, and, kind of theme each of the meetings. I think that would be more productive. Thank you.
Madame Chabot?
Okay, but I think that witnesses will want to broach topics in a more general manner, probably. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I think that the witnesses we invite will want to give their more general opinion of the topic. They will want to discuss eligibility as well as income substitution, as well as the number of hours for special benefits or of the EI black hole, so to speak. So I don't think we can ask witnesses to only cover one theme if we chop it up in the way you're suggesting. I don't know how the interpreter will interpret my sausage technique, so chop it up. I'm saying that with all due respect, Ms. Gazan. I think that the new position of the NDP on a guaranteed minimum income is another debate in itself, and I do not think we can combine the two because it is much more global than an EI system that was put in place for workers who lose their jobs. So it's not meant to replace a whole series of programs that exists in Quebec and Canada. It's a different debate, and I think we should address it differently if we decide to do so. Thank you, Madame Vaughan.
Yeah, I mean, it's EI is a complex issue, and I think Mr. Viss has raised an important issue around the antiquity of the computer system, which apparently still is coded by COBOL, which it's old. Trust me, it's held together by spit and glue sometimes. But I think taking a look at its flexibility, one of the reasons we can't do day-by-day disbursements is because the computer system just can't handle it without collapse. And so it's tying our hands as we move towards EI reform. And I think taking a look at what the cost of that change is and how we avoid a phoenix calamity in the mess is somebody has to start talking about that. And I think this committee is well positioned to do that because it limits our capacity to deal with seasonal industries, the workers that are impacted in the regions of the country that depend on EI to tide people over through the sort of the surges of income and the loss of work due to climate. But I would add to that I think that MP Gazan is also challenging us to broaden our understanding of how we ensure people's earnings when work has clearly changed radically, and the gaps that people experience are now caverns that they fall through. And so I don't think we should limit our imagination on solving EI, but I think that we need to fix EI and in doing so fix it in a way that it can be reformed to do more than just simply address precarious work, the gig economy, which is the urban equivalent of the seasonal employment black hole, as it's sometimes referred to. So I think it'll depend on the witnesses we call. I think that Madame Chabot's motion is broad enough to allow for MP Viss's line of inquiry as well as MP Gazan's. And I think there are other issues we're going to bring to the table that escaped the previous study on this, which was done just 4 years ago in this very same committee.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Ms. Gazan, please.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Adam, for that. And Madame Chabot, I agree with you. It's a very complicated system. Here's the thing. We don't know how long we're going to be in this pandemic. Many people are going to be running out of EI. I know certainly people in my riding are starting not to qualify for EI. And what that ends up is going from not qualifying to EI to being unsheltered. And so I think we need to look at the current system, but options for going forward. I would propose, and I would certainly be happy to recommend a few witnesses, experts in the field, to have at least one expert or two experts on guaranteed livable basic incomes that could sit on one of the research panels so we can learn more about options going forward in this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gazan. Okay, Mr. Housefather, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been in discussion with MP Vaughn, and I'm wondering if we can come back just for a second, Mr. Chair, if you allow it, to the motion from Ms. Falk, because I don't think that Mr. Vaughn's complex reformulation was required. I think that Mr. Vaughn's essentially would like to just add a couple of words into Ms. Falk's motion. So, Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to present that to Ms. Falk in English et aussi à Madame Chabot en français et voir si c'est acceptable. So in Ms. Falk's motion, it would stay as is, except in the third, it would basically read that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study in the impact of COVID-19 on the financial, social, health, and overall well-being of seniors, so stays the same, that the committee review existing and announced programs for seniors, and then just add in the words, including federal transfers to provinces and territories and Indigenous governments, and then continue with Ms. Falk's wording and make recommendations to improve support for seniors, etc. So it would only add those words, including federal transfers to provinces and territories and Indigenous governments. And that would be the only change to Ms. Falk's motion. Et juste pour répéter ça pour Madame Chabot.
So to repeat for Ms. Chabot, so if we go ahead with this proposal, we keep the motion from Ms. Falk as is, but after programs for seniors, we say including federal transfers to provinces and territories and Indigenous governments. And only these words would be added to Ms. Falk's motion. So this is what Mr. Vaughan would accept.
Okay with you, because I think that would simplify things as opposed to a whole new motion. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that latitude.
No, thank you. I think that we're getting a little more focused in here, subject to what Ms. Falk has to say, but I did see an email exchange between Ms. Falk and Mr. Vaughan that wasn't far off what you just did. Ms. Falk, your thoughts?
Yep, I was going to say ask if my email was received, because it's basically, I just took what Mr. Vaughan had sent me and we interjected it into the motion. So yeah, that's fine.
I'm good.
Okay, so
Great minds think alike. Thanks, Rosemary.
So we have a friendly amendment, and I take it that we are now back to the motion, but next on the speakers list is Madame Chabot. À vous la parole.
I have a question because of this added portion. What do you mean by transfers, by federal transfers for seniors? I understand when we talk about programs for seniors, but what do you mean with these transfers that you want to add to the motion?
Mr. Housefather, Mr. Vaughan. Mr. Vaughan has his hand up. Go ahead. You want to respond to that?
Sure. There are several cost-shared programs between different orders of government. For example, around seniors housing, it's an area of provincial responsibility, and while we can make programs eligible, setting targets or having specific achievements outlined in that will have an impact on the quality of life that seniors face. So should federal money be conditioned? Shouldn't it be conditioned? What was transferred? What were the conditions it was transferred under? What was the impact of those conditions? I think we need to take a look at that. We also have the experience of the disability community's experience around CERB, where we transferred CERB to working people who were working, who were laid off with disabilities, but also received a top-up in different provinces. And when they went on CERB, that top-up was clawed back. Understanding how federal transfers to individuals, including individuals on CPP who may be seniors and may be working, different provincial governments treated those transfers to individuals differently. We need to understand what governs that decision, how it was rectified, and how to make sure we don't create gaps like that in the future. So although there are areas clearly of provincial authority, even some of those areas have partnered funding models that I think we need to understand what the federal role is. Is it a silent partner? Is it a partner that imposes national standards, or is it one that gets out of the way and simply matches per capita transfers? That's a whole area that has a direct impact on seniors, and therefore I think it's an area that we should include in the study as we try to understand the impact our federal dollars have on the quality of life for Canadians as they age.
Madame Chabot?
Thank you for your answer. It's much clearer now. So I am for this addition to the motion. And I am for Ms. Fox's motion, and we could study that after the study on EI. So I believe we have consensus.
Colleagues, we have now a motion that has been amended with the acceptance of the mover. Do we have consensus to adopt that motion? I believe we do. I see it. Thumbs up all around. Thank you. And I believe we also have consensus that the next item of for us to study is the EI motion presented by Ms. Chabot, and that it is broad enough to encompass the themes that we've now laid upon the analyst in a somewhat haphazard fashion to have her put together the background documents. And thereafter, a study of the motion, on the motion that was just presented. So I think that's where we are now. I see Mr. Vaughn, did you?
No.
Okay, we're back to the analyst. Do you have even a little bit of clarity now as to what we might be looking for in terms of themes?
Yes, so this has been very helpful. Thank you. So what I would suggest is simply, because I think we're on the same page, is that we begin on February 18th the study with departmental officials. And then when you decide what date you want to submit your witnesses, I could also suggest that maybe the Library of Parliament analyst could also suggest some witnesses just in case we wanted to sort of cover a broader range, and you can, consider them or not as you choose. But I would just throw that out there as a suggestion. And then we can also prepare background materials for the committee to be ready for the 18th. Does that sound reasonable? Does that sound like that's the best way to begin?
I think so. Ms. Falk, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted clarification on MP Hostfather when he said his amendment part. I just want to make sure it says federal programs in there.
That's
and
what
not
I
just,
heard.
Okay, perfect. Okay, nope, that's good. Thank you.
Am I right, Anthony, that was your intent, or that, and I think that's what you said.
It was federal transfers to the provinces and territories and Indigenous governments.
Thank you.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So if I think the course of action proposed by the analyst is a good one. Can we perhaps set a date for the submission of witness lists? If our first meeting is on the 18th, probably a week out would be a fair amount of time to be able to invite people. I'm just for the sake of discussion, can we say the 11th, which is 9 days from now, or is that too aggressive? I'm in your hands. Ms. Falk, you have the floor. No, Ms. Falk doesn't want the floor. Mr. Kent.
Thanks, Chair. Well, there have been an abundant number of studies in the last few years on employment insurance, so I think that certainly next Friday it wouldn't be too aggressive in setting a deadline for at least the first wave of witnesses. I would think by this Friday, it's quite possible that we could have a dozen or so folks who have studied this deeply and who have, from the various think tanks, from the various international organizations that have looked at either guaranteed wage or employment insurance in its different forms, that we could very easily have a pretty broad group of proposed witnesses by next week.
All right, thank you. Madame Chabot?
Yes, by Friday it's realistic, but just to be sure, perhaps next Monday, so just a few days more. But you're right. It will not be difficult to find witnesses for that study.
Mr. Vaughn, please.
Yeah, to aid to in our work and to build on what MP Kent just said, there was a pretty comprehensive study filed in the last Parliament. It may be worthwhile for the clerk to circulate that particular study to all members of the committee, as we make sure we don't duplicate some of the recommendations or some of the ideas, and also take a look at the witnesses there that may have been called before, and diversify the different voices we're hearing from. So if that would be possible for the clerk to circulate that committee, would be great.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that my suggestion of the 11th is anything but aggressive. So we can probably pull back from that a couple of days. Parliament doesn't sit next week. So today is the 2nd. What, say a week from, so 9th, 8th, say a week from, 2nd, 3rd, a week from today. How about that? That gives folks the weekend if they need it. So can we agree that the deadline for the submission of witnesses to the clerk of the committee will be February 9th at 5 o'clock Eastern? And I think the analyst has made an excellent suggestion that we start off with departmental officials on the 18th. And I think Mr. Vaughn, did you want to speak to that, or are we ready to move to the next item?
We're good. Sorry, that was previous item.
All right. Okay, Mr. Viss, go ahead.
Per the department officials, can we make sure that maybe if the analyst can provide everyone on the committee a copy of the report I referenced, and maybe that the officials responsible for reviewing the administrative and technological capacity of the program come before committee as part of the suite of departmental witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to come back to you, Mr. Viss, because I would like the committee to have a look at and perhaps advise on the draft letter that has been circulated. I'll give you a brief synopsis, and then I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Viss. The Department of Indigenous Services came before the committee. Mr. Viss asked a series of questions around costing, and the bureaucrats provided a written response. Mr. Viss was not satisfied that the written response was a complete answer, and has asked me as the chair to write back to the officials to get a more complete answer. A letter has been drafted to that effect. So I'll cede the floor to Mr. Viss if there's anything further you wish to add, and otherwise we'll take the advice on the committee as to the whether the letter should be sent and whether the content should be as drafted. Go ahead, Mr. Viss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My main contention was when I read the correspondence from Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation, I was asking them the same set of questions, and they were able to provide a much more thorough response, including the number of people at CMHC who worked on Indigenous related housing. It was a very straightforward question, and the department failed to provide any indication or any number of staff that actually worked on Indigenous housing. And it was just, I think it's only fair that they give a breakdown of how many staff members work on these files as per my request. And it was just a simple follow-up, and there's no ill intent. It's just I want a complete answer to my question. Thank you.
Mr. Viss, at 3:44 Atlantic, so 2:44 Eastern, a draft letter was sent. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but certainly open to your comments. This letter was put together by the clerk with some suggestions, or at least a once over by me.
Thank
so
you, Mr. Chair.
if that letter does the trick, great. If you have any constructive criticism or changes you'd like to make, or any other member of the committee, please.
I communicated to the clerk that I was satisfied with the letter. Thank you, Mr.
Great.
Chair.
Okay. Any other interventions as to whether a letter should be sent and whether it should be that letter? Si Ms. Falk likes it. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, give me a hand here. I might have lost my attention for a moment there. Which letter are we referring to? It was sent by email at 2:45 p.m. today. Okay, I just opened it up. From the Department of Indigenous Services. And what do you want to do with this letter? This letter serves to ask for a better response than the one that was offered by the officials. This is following their testimony before our committee. Well, I imagine we can answer that? Yes, I hope so.
Please. Mr. Kent, do you have a comment?
Yes, thanks, Chair. No, I think that the letter serves a purpose. It's straightforward, it's respectful, and merely reiterates a reasonable request.
All right. Anyone else with any concerns? If not, I think we're good to send the letter. Mr. Schmale, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. It was on another issue. I thought you were done. I apologize.
I think we almost are. All right. I read consensus to send the letter as is. Mr. Schmale, you have the floor.
Okay, perfect, Chair. Thank you. I believe everyone has a copy of the notice of motion, basically another letter, if possible. The Chair is nodding yes. I don't have everyone else on the screen. So it's basically to reach out to CMHC, send another letter. Did you want me to read the motion, Chair, or can I just talk about it? What would you prefer?
It might be better if you read it, just in case people don't have it in front of them, please.
Okay, perfect. So this motion came about out of questioning with the head of CMHC when he was asked about the costs associated with rebranding. At that point, he had mentioned that there were no costs, but it turns out that in a story done with Blacklocks, it turned out that to be false. So here's the motion that I put to the committee, and hopefully we can send a letter to the Eric Siddall. That in light of a recent media report, CMHC hid costs from MPs dated December 18th, 2020. Blacklocks reporter highlighting an apparent conflict between information found in documents of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and testimony provided to this committee by Dr. Evan Siddall, CEO of CMHC. The committee clerk write to Mr. Siddall requesting the following. Number one, that the CMHC table with the committee access to information request AF-2020-00087/ML. And number 2, that Mr. Siddall be invited to provide a written statement clarifying his previous testimony in light of these documents and provide the precise dollar figures and itemized breakdown of how all funds were spent on CMHC's rebranding effort. And number 3, that these actions be completed within 10 business days of the CMHC's receipt of the clerk's correspondence.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smale. The motion is in order. So the debate is on the motion. Madame Chabot.
I have a question. So the goal with this motion, by sending the letter, is assuming that the testimony was not compliant. Now, did I understand that this is based on a newspaper article? Have you validated this? I'm trying to understand the sources that led to this motion.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Madame Chabot. The newspaper article was based on documents that were found in an accessed information request by another member of Parliament, and that's how the information came to light. So the accessed information request and the documents do show that there was, in fact, a cost.
Mr. Vaughn?
Yeah, I have no problem with the letter. I think it just needs to be cleared up, and we need to understand what they contemplated when they took the action. As much as I have struggled with the French translation of mortgage to hypothèque, other than that, I don't see a significant reason to change it. But I'm sure mortgage is equally as complicated in the other direction. So it's. But I think just finding out what happened, I think, is critically important.
Thank you, everyone.
Any other interventions on this? Okay, great. I think what's being asked for in terms of the drafting of the letter is very straightforward. Mr. Smale will make sure that you get a look at a draft, but I don't think we need to convene as a full committee to authorize the text, and so we'll get something drafted and get it sent off. No further interventions on the topic. Is there? Okay. I think we can consider that dealt with. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Chair. I raised my hand.
Hand.
Yeah, I just gotta. I'm new to this. I'm just reading this line that provide the precise dollar figures and itemized breakdowns of how our funds were spent on the CMHC rebranding effort. I don't know how complex the size of this fund. I just wonder that if 10 business days is enough for them to compile that information, but it could be just as small as if these numbers are all readily available. So maybe it's a small effort. So I just don't know. I'm looking to my colleagues on.
I think it was 126,000.
Yeah, it was done in house, so it's not a complex project.
No, it wasn't huge.
It's just trying to figure out what was spent, why it was done, just details, so we have a reconciliation between the article and the statement made at committee.
Oh, then I'm very comfortable to send this letter.
Okay, thanks, everyone. I think the last thing that I want to cover off is the next couple of meetings. So Thursday is the Rapid Housing Initiative update. I regret to inform that the minister is not available. We do have officials from CMHC, and we do have the parliamentary secretary to the minister who is prepared to come before the committee, make a presentation, and take your questions. So that's this Thursday, and then we have a constituency week and the parliamentary budget officer after that. We had asked the parliamentary budget officer to provide us with a summary of his comments by February 10th. The response that we got was that he could only provide the summary in English. Subject to the direction of the committee, my inclination would be to go back to the PBO and to let him know that we can't accept something in one language, and when it's ready in both languages, we will accept it, and we'd like it to be produced in a timely fashion. So those two things by way of update, but the floor is open for comments with respect to those items or anything else that you want to raise. Mr. Vaughn, you have the floor.
No, sorry, that was from the previous. I don't take my hand down fast enough. There you go.
Madame Chabot.
Sweet.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Chair. We can only accept. We can't accept communication in one language only, and it has to be in a reasonable time frame and in both languages. And I think this is something that the PBO should have known, quite honestly.
Please.
Oh, sorry. Did you recognize me, Chair?
You have the floor, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. You had mentioned about new business or some outstanding items. Is this an okay time to mention that?
There is.
Okay. I just want to go back to the motion I think I tabled, I don't know how long ago, regarding the study about the officials meeting for a couple of meetings to talk about those that have lost a child. With I can pull up the motion if you'd like. It's supporting families after the loss of a child. Basically, it would tie into maybe some EI conversation, but it might even be a standalone item. I can reread it if you want.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I'm in the process of pulling it up, but if you have it in front of you, that would be helpful. I do recall it. Go ahead.
Okay. So that the committee conduct a study of no less than 3 two-hour meetings on the implementation of the 7 recommendations found in the committee's 14th report entitled Supporting Families After the Loss of a Child. That the committee invite the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development and departmental officials to appear for no less than 2 hours each. That the committee invite pregnancy and infant loss stakeholder groups to appear for no less than 2 two-hour meetings, and the meeting be televised, and that the committee present its findings to the House.
Okay, so you've put that motion on notice, and now you're moving it.
Yeah, well, I can move it, or we can just have a discussion on potentially studying it more.
Sure. Okay. I think for the sake of good form, let's consider it now to be moved, and we'll have a discussion on it, and then we'll see where that goes. Mr. Vaughn, you have the floor.
Yeah, I was a member in the last term of Parliament, and we did that study. It was the last study we did just before we rose in the summertime. 2 things. One, it sort of covers that ground again with an unlikely change in the recommendations, but it's also in many ways the wrong minister. There were some recommendations regarding the Canada Child Benefit that it wasn't canceled fast enough, and should it be canceled, should there be sort of a 1-month grace period to aid in the recovery. But that was the only issue that touched the minister you refer to in your motion. The minister that has carriage of this is Minister Qualtrough through the EI fund. That's where the bereavement and a lot of the tweaks to EI as they relate to maternity are carried. So you might not want to be so specific in the ministers you identify, and instead go at it from issues, and then we can find the right ministers or departments to speak to it. What I would suggest with that, because there are some complexities there, that we refer Mr. Schmel's motion to the subcommittee for scheduling and refinement, and come back to the committee with sort of a consensus motion that builds on the report, but also identifies the right ministries to push to get satisfaction on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Ms. Falk.
Thank you, Chair. And I was also on the committee when we had studied this in the last Parliament, and I mean, the testimony we had heard was terrible. And I would just, make the argument that this minister that's mentioned does have purview over service candidates at some point as well with ESDC. And so I think that's where we heard the problems. I mean, you don't talk to people who have just lost their child as your child is now deceased, your benefits are eliminated. So I think this actually is quite interesting given the context of COVID and the high stresses, financial stress, emotional stress, mental health stress that Canadians are feeling. And I think, it'd even be good to check in and see what has been implemented, because there were several recommendations that were made to the House. And it would be good to see if the ministers responsible have given direction at all to their departments to change or implement training or that type of thing. So I actually think it is quite timely as well. I mean, for one, I can't imagine having a COVID baby in the middle of all this, let alone losing a child, and just maybe not having that compassion and empathy that our that people deserve when they're in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Mr. Schmale, I'm going to come back to you because I don't see anyone else on the speakers list. Your thoughts, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Shabbat, who just put her name on. Your thought on Mr. Vaughn's suggestion that we bounce this to a subcommittee to see if we can come to consensus around refining the motion. Or do you want us to bring this to a decision today?
I'm happy to go to the subcommittee. I would like to be talked about and scheduled if possible.
Yep.
I don't know if our other colleagues have some suggestions that might help as well.
Okay, Madame Shabbat, s'il vous plaît.
Given the important nature of this motion, it would be good to send it to the subcommittee who could provide more detail. And I would like to know if that study has already been undertaken. I think Ms. Falk said that we could look at what's already been done before undertaking this study. I would like to know what help do these parents get from the federal government currently to start. Thank you.
Please.
Just a couple comments here, or thoughts, I should say. I think based on today's conversation so far, we've committed to 11 meetings past February 18th. Would be my calculation with Ms. Shabbat's motion, meaning implying 5 meetings, and Ms. Falk's motion, which is 6 meetings. That's not including any recommendations, I would assume. So it's probably, in the formulation of those reports, it's at least 11 meetings beyond February 18th. Just given that, and given the time today, I have absolutely no problem with Mr. Schmale's motion, but I do agree with my colleague, Mr. Vaughn, that perhaps referring it to the subcommittee and having a more fulsome discussion about scoping that particular study might be just a good next step, given the fact that we're probably going to run out of time today. And I think there's also other motions that have been put on the list. There's quite a few. I have one on there that I'm keen about and think is really relevant as well. I'm not moving it today, but I think there is quite a few other motions on notice. So perhaps we need to think about what we schedule next after the 2 studies. But is that really pressing at the moment? I would suggest not. Thanks.
Okay, I'm fine with the subcommittee. We'll fine tune it.
Yep. Okay. And just Mr. Turnbull made the point, but I think it bears reminding that separate and apart from the 11 meetings to which we've committed, there may very well be things referred to us from the House by way of legislation and by way of examination of estimates, supplementary estimates, and the like. And we, in those 11 meetings, do not take account of reviewing the draft report and consideration of the recommendations on the study that we're about to wrap up. So it is the plate is filling quite quickly, and there seems to be so much more that we want to do. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not saying we need to discuss it today, but in one of the motions I presented, there was one on a study to it was related to bankruptcy, and that we didn't need a lot of meetings. It was for a pension fund when businesses go bankrupt, and because of what's going on currently, and unless things greatly improve, we know that there are 180,000 businesses that might shut down. Well, we need to protect retirement fund, and I wasn't asking for a great number of meetings, so I think we might be able to consider it if we have a bit of time in the future. Thank you. The subcommittee could look into it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to give a heads up and remind members also that there's a private members bill that our colleague Matt Genereux has put forward that is going to be voted on by the House probably the week that we come back, and that would be referred to our committee if it was adopted. And I do believe that we should prioritize legislation and ensure that there's a spot for any bill that gets sent to committee. So just on behalf of Matt, I just wanted to give everybody a heads up and remind everybody that there may be a bill coming to us, and we should at least put a date as well when the bill gets referred to us and not wait on that too long. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Viss, please.
Well, Mr. Housefather, you just stole my thunder. I actually seconded that bill in Parliament, and I very much appreciate your intervention there.
Is there any other business to come before the meeting? Madam Clerk, is there anything that I've missed that we need to talk about?
I think you have everything on my list checked off. Thank you.
Excellent. Colleagues, thank you very much. This was a very productive meeting. I think the path forward is reasonably clear. We got a bunch of things cleared up. I wish you a good evening. We have consensus to adjourn. I think we do. Okay. Have a good evening. We'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.
Bonne soirée. Bye.